Romans 12:16 says this, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men." Don't dwell on the negative all the time. If it's possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Well, someday we'll preach on that verse. It really does depend on us how peaceful we are and peaceable we are with those around us. But as we grow together as a church, we're going to always need to learn to live together. Claudette and I have had a number of single people, 7 single people at one time, live in our home with us. And we've lived in a home with another family and single people. There was, how many were in that house down in Minneapolis? 15 people? 17 people, yeah. 17 people all in one house. We lived together. And so we know what it's like to actually share accommodations with other people. Sometimes there's only one bathroom. I have experienced pains that man should not be allowed to experience. But we know what it's like to live together in close quarters. In fact, I even wrote a little paper called The Lost Art of Living Under One Roof. And I just talk about how to live together and share accommodation if you're sharing an apartment or something like that, or a house. But as a church, we also have to learn how to live together too. And sometimes we rub shoulders with each other, and sometimes things don't go the way we ought to, and we don't like the way somebody does something. And we just, as our church grows, we're going to have a lot of new people coming in who don't necessarily know our history and haven't really had a chance to go through those changes. And so we just have to adapt. It's possible that even in the room tonight, there are people here that you don't even know their name, and yet they're members of the church or are going to be soon. And so along the way, our relationships need some mechanics worked out. There are things we need to do to help our relationship grow. And we read about that here in Romans 12. And this is true in every relationship. We need help with this. In our marriage, employer-employee relationships, there's certain mechanics and how that works. In good friendships, you need to understand the mechanics of how to have and maintain a good friendship. Even among siblings, I grew up in a home where there was 6 boys and 1 girl, and we didn't have fights. We just had really loud arguments where people dropped down unconscious on the floor. It's true. I knocked my brother out twice, and he knocked me out twice. It's true in church family relationships too, that we need to know how to live together without killing each other. Well, that's the way I say it, but it's a little softer than that. But it is true, because sometimes people in the church, when they collide with one another, they just find another church. They don't find a way to live together. And it's even true in relationships that with leaders, like leaders need to know how to live a certain way. And one of the mechanics that we need to work out in our life in relationships is how to listen. And being a good listener is a very, very necessary skill, and in maintaining the relationship. And that's why tonight I want to talk to you about being a good listener. Did you hear what I just said? Yeah. Being a good listener. Let's look at this passage again. It says, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things." What's it saying? It's saying, that you and I, if we have our own mindset and our own way of doing things, and we have our own goals and our own expectations and all of that, we could very easily shut people out and not welcome them in. You and I could never even fulfill the mandate of this passage unless we knew how to be good listeners. Because you see, when you're a bad listener, you're generally bad in relationships. Bad listeners don't have many friends. I don't know if you noticed that, but if you think of people that were bad listeners in your life, they're generally people that don't have good relationships with other people. Bad listeners get upset very easily. They have explosive behavior. They don't really hear the heart of the other person. They just blow up. They think about themselves all the time. Everything that somebody says is all about them. Bad listeners tend to turn the tables all the time. When someone is saying, I'm just really feeling a lot of pain right now and I really need your help, a bad listener will say, well, what about me? Because bad listeners aren't real good at relationships. They think a lot about themselves. They only want to hear what they want to hear. And so when bad listeners end up in leadership of a church, then they become bad leaders too. And when bad listeners are in a church, they start alienating people, and then people don't want to come to the church, or they don't want to be around other people, or they purposely sit in another section of the church so they can avoid her or him. See? So if anyone here aspires to be used by God, if you really believe that God wants to use you in a significant way, one of the things you're going to need to do is learn to be a good listener. Now, the title of my message is Being a Good Listener. Now, I've not always been a good listener, and I want to expose myself on this area tonight, because in my life I was not a good listener. I developed really bad habits as a teenager, and being a really bad listener. In fact, when I got saved, shortly after I became the pastor of the fellowship we were in, that was in 1974, 75, and I was a very bad listener. In fact, I could tell you terrible stories of how I used to have all our battles with people. I'd yell and scream at them, and here I was the pastor. Yell and scream at them just because I was so fed up with them, And I wouldn't listen to their side of any story. I only listened to enough of what people said. Let them get about a fifth of the way into their discussion with me, and then I'd just say, okay, I got enough. Now let me just tell you. And then I'd interrupt them, and then I'd totally dominate the conversation. Now, my wife's being very, very quiet right now. She's not saying amen or anything like that. But those who knew me then will testify that this is true. And so I know what it's like actually to be a bad listener. And it's not that I've perfected it yet, because there are times that I think I can fall back into that if I'm not careful. But a good leader knows how to be a good listener. And so tonight, let me teach you about some practical principles about this. Take a look at Acts chapter 14, verse 8. Acts chapter 14, verse 8. I'm going to teach you, that actually the Bible teaches about being a good listener. It's kind of neat. Acts chapter 14, verse 8. All those who want to do something significant for God, there are skills that we need to pick up and develop in our life. Not the laying on of hands, but skills in how to work with people, because people are what God's all about. Acts 14:8. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. Verse 9 of Acts 14. This man heard Paul speaking. See, he was listening to him. Paul, observing him intently, and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up straight on your feet." And he leaped up and walked. Well, that would never have happened if Paul hadn't have figured out that man was listening to him. There are sometimes when I preach that I can tell people aren't listening to me. There are some people not here tonight, obviously, but they'll stare at me with this faraway look in their eyes. When I look in their eyes while I'm preaching, I can see Nova Scotia and the far east coast of Newfoundland. They're staring at me with a glazed look, like they locked themselves in position, and they're probably asleep, but they're just staring at me. I know one man, he already knows who I'm thinking about. This was years ago in another land, in a faraway land. As soon as I stood to preach, his head would tilt back, his mouth would open, and he'd start making sighs too deep for words. And he'd be out. He's one of the ushers. He'd be out. Just out. I think church was one of the only places the man had a decent sleep. And I was touched that it happened during my ministry. A man of peace I am, really. But Paul could tell that this man was listening to him, and he could look out and see that this guy is intently observing and listening to what he's saying. And because of that, he realized he had faith. So the first thing I want to show you tonight about being a good listener is look at the person speaking to you. Look at the person speaking to you. That seems awfully simple, doesn't it? But sometimes if you're talking to someone and you want to be a good listener, if you don't look at them, you'll never really hear them. If you make eye contact with the person, then the person feels like you're listening to what they're saying. This person was looking at Paul, and Paul could see that this guy was intently listening to him. If someone approaches you to say something to you, make sure you stop what you're doing and look at them. That's really important, to give eye contact to people. I think it's rude when I go into a business and I walk up to the counter and the person has their head down. They say, "Can I help you?" Do you know what I feel like doing? This is just me. I just feel like standing there and not saying anything or doing anything until they look up and make eye contact with me. And I say, because I just think it's rude. Some people just don't know how to serve, how to make eye contact and make you feel connected, you know. At least at Walmart, they greet you when you come in. And they look at you and they greet you. So look at the person. People feel insignificant when you don't look at them. It's really true. Here's the second tip on how to be a good listener. Have one conversation at a time. Have one conversation at a time. Now, I'm not referring to my household. Okay, but those that come to my home sometimes, I'm sure, Adam, you have really had to go through quite a transition of how to sit at a table with, say, 7 or 8 people and actually have 10 different conversations at the same time. I'm sure Jason went through this. Jason, is the only child from his family. And so when he came into the power clan, it's actually possible in our house to have a large number of conversations going on at the same time. And what I like about it is it's kind of like you can get in on one, and if you don't like it, you just jump in on the other one. But also what's neat about it is you could actually be talking to yourself and nobody knows. However, that's not what I'm talking about tonight. When I say one conversation, let me explain. You know, it's very common to have more than one conversation going on at the same time, because there's the conversation that's going on verbally when I'm talking to you or when someone is talking to you, and then there's the conversation that's going on inside your head. For instance, while I'm talking about all the conversations at the powerhouse, you're thinking of what goes on in your house or people that you knew or how you grew up. So there's another conversation goes on here, and someone can be saying something to you, but inside your head, you're having another conversation. Do you know what I'm talking about? And if we're going to be good listeners, we can only have one conversation. Let me show you this in the Bible. You say, is that in the Bible? It really is. Take a look at John chapter 8, verse 43. John 8:43. I was so impressed to see that the Bible deals with these kinds of things. John chapter 8, verse 43. John chapter 8, verse 43. Jesus said, "Why do you not understand my speech?" He says, "Why don't you get what I'm saying to you?" He says, "Because you're not able to listen to my word. You're of your father, the devil." I like Jesus. He was so gentle. "And the desires of your father you want to do too. He was a murderer from the beginning and doesn't stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. But because I tell you the truth, you don't believe me." Jesus said, "Why don't you understand what I'm saying?" And then he answered the question. He said, the reason is there's another conversation going on in your head. When I'm preaching to you, what you're doing is you're sifting it and sorting it. And in your mind, you're arguing with me. See, they were arguing with Jesus in their brains because they were filled with another doctrine. They said, "Well, I don't believe that." And so they don't want to learn. And therefore, they couldn't really hear what he was saying. Jesus asked them why they didn't really hear what he was saying, and then he told them why. So to be a good listener, you need to be able to focus on the audible conversation and not the conversation that's going on in here. Focus in on the audible conversation. You ever been in those conversations where somebody's talking and you kind of know where they're going, and so you go somewhere else for a while and then you come back and join them, and you realize when you get back they just said something really important, and they say, "Isn't that so?" And you say, "Could be. I haven't got a clue what it is." Men, when you come back and she's saying, "So what do you think we ought to do?" And you say, "We can't afford it." It's always a stock answer. We can't afford it. She wanted to know whether you wanted to go downstairs for dinner or eat in the bedroom. Can't afford it. Try to stay in touch with the audible conversation. A good listener will not think on what they're going to say next. A good listener won't always be sitting there thinking, "This is what I'm going to say as soon as they stop." A good listener will actually listen to what they have to say. Sometimes we fall into that trap. We're sitting there listening, but we're really not. We're thinking about what we're going to say. And as soon as they go, you jump right in and say, well, here's what I'm going to tell you. And we really need to hear what people are saying. The third thing I want to tell you, the third tip on being a good listener, is let other people finish speaking before speaking yourself. Let others finish speaking before speaking yourself. In order to listen well, you need to stop talking. That's one thing about listening. It's really hard to listen and talk at the same time. So what turns a discussion into an argument is usually when we don't let the other person finish. When we interrupt. That's usually how arguments start. We're trying to we say, well, I'm trying to get a word in edgewise. But really what's going on is we're not listening. See, we're saying, okay, I've heard enough of what you want to say about this. Now let me say something. But excuse me, we just need to listen. Now I know some people ramble on, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But in the business of communication, there are only two frustrations. When you're in the realm of communication, there's only two types of frustration you can have. One is when people dominate the conversation and won't let other people speak. And the other one is when you interrupt people before they ever get to say what's really in their heart. Those are the two frustrations in communication. So while you might get frustrated that somebody won't let you get a word in edgewise, they might get frustrated that you want to keep interrupting them and not let them say what's really in their heart. When you don't let another person finish what they're saying, then here's what happens. You begin to put words into their mouth. Like, I don't know if I can say this the way it would be most comfortable, but when we're not really letting them say what's in their heart, what we do is we begin to project the finish of their conversation. We look at the end of their sentence and predict this is where they're going. And we'll end up saying, you said this, when in fact they never ever did say it. Because we're not letting them really say what's in their heart, and we're really not listening to it. We start speculating. I wonder what they're really trying to say. I bet you're trying to say this. Or let me summarize this. I bet you I can summarize basically where they're going. I used to do this all the time. Somebody would sit down and say, well, Pastor, I'm really having a problem in my marriage. And, my husband, he and I were just not talking very much. And, we're just finding we just don't communicate about real. Okay. That's pretty much all I need to hear. Now, let me just tell you what the problem is here. And I never really got a chance, or gave them a chance, rather, to tell me really what was in their heart. So it's really important that we make sure that we let them finish what they're saying before we speak. Men, this is an acquired skill, to sit there and wait. Number 4, listen to the person's heart, not their words. Listen to the person's heart, not their words. People will often say many things before they say the exact thing. It's not a flaw, but sometimes people just say a lot of stuff before they say what's really going on. That means a good listener has to wait patiently. To be a good listener, you have to be patient. Sometimes people will say 10 minutes worth of things before they actually say what they're wanting to say. This is often very true with women. I'm not putting women down. I'm saying oftentimes women really find that the best way to get out what's in their heart is to tell you a whole lot about the situation, but not necessarily say exactly what it is. And you have to listen very carefully to hear the heart, not the words. It's not a flaw. I'm just saying this is the way some people communicate. Now, for me, words are very important. It's just the way I'm wired. Words are very important. Words to me are like currency. Like words to me is like what money is to other people. Words are how things are made. Do you know God made everything with words? How relationships are established. Words. How you maintain a relationship. Words. Words are how dreams become visible when you have words. Words are very important to me. Words are how one heart transfers data to another heart. It's through speech, through words. Words to me are very precise tools. I like to craft words. I like to be careful about how I use words, because to me words are tools, they're instruments. They're very, very technical things. words are. However, let me give you an example. If someone says, I hate you, they may repent later, but those words are so valuable. I hate you. That you can't dismiss it lightly, because those 3 words are very precise instruments that were used. And how many of us have been hurt by words? I don't think there's anybody in the room that hasn't been hurt by words. And we have been. And sometimes, even though the incident has passed, the scars remain from that hurt. But now, sentences are different than words. Sentences are not so precise. Words are very precise, but sentences always aren't precise. Sometimes we put exact words together, but we come up with sentences that don't say what we really want them to say. This is true in emails. I've discovered that in email, no matter how hard I try, sometimes words just don't go together properly in a sentence. Let me give you an example. Let's say that someone wanted to tell another person just how much they appreciate the work that other person does. And they want to use words like thankful, because that's a very precise word. And they want to use the word honor. It's a very precise and technical word. They want to use the word appreciate. And so what do they say? They say, I want to say how thankful you are that I appreciate your honor for the work you do. Okay, they got all those precise words in there, but the sentence didn't go together right. Some of you said it sounded fine to me. It just didn't go together right, because sentences are not as accurate as words are. This is really true. We know what we want to say. We had the precise words for it, but the sentence was highly inaccurate. And this is why we need to listen to another person's heart, because sometimes their sentences don't tell us exactly what's going on. So if you just listen to their sentences and become technical about that, you'll miss the heart. It might take time to get past all the words and get down to what's really in the heart. And that's why Proverbs 7:24 says this, now therefore listen to me, my children, pay attention to the words of my mouth. Another way of saying it is, listen to what I'm not saying. Pay attention to me. Listen to the words that are coming out and see if you can pick up what I'm not saying. Sometimes how other people speak to us can so turn us off that we don't listen anymore. So you have to listen to what's going on in the heart. When someone begins a conversation, now listen to me. Boy, I just have a problem with this. I do. Boy, that used to make me shut down. When I'd sit down with someone and they'd say, now listen to me. Right away, boy, I just say, don't tell me to listen to you. I'll listen to you because I want to listen to you. When you say, now listen to me, it makes me feel like you're about to tell me off. Tell me what to do. We're here to have a conversation. Don't be turned off, though, by what other people say, because if you do, you'll fall into the trap of not being a good listener. If I've learned anything in pastoral leadership, it's that people say the darndest things. They do. I've had hate mail sent to me. Hate mail, some of the most elaborate. I had an 18-page type letter with footnotes. Hate mail. It started with, Dear Pastor Power, why don't you go back to hell where you belong? That was the opening sentence. And then it was 18 pages. It was typed and it had footnotes, little numbers, and you could look down and reference it. It was so beautiful. No kidding, it was so beautiful. I kept it for many years. I had never seen anyone spend that much time telling me off. I was impressed that they thought that much of me. Really, I did. I kept it for a long time. And then later, in fact, I put it in a file, Colin, called detractors. And whenever someone wrote hate mail to me, I'd put it in that file and kind of keep it. I thought it was kind of neat that people would even give me that much attention to send me a hate mail. I've had negative newspaper articles written about me. I've had people threaten me physically. I had a guy show up with a rifle one day to shoot preachers. I've had people swear at me in church. Swear at me. The guy, we were putting him out of the church, and on the way out the door, he was saying things that I'd never said when I wasn't saved. And he's yelling them at me as he's going out the door in church. I've had people tell me they were visited by aliens. And they even showed me the 2 holes in their head where the aliens inserted electronic probes. I'm not making this up. I've had people tell me that after 15 years of marriage and 6 kids, they believe they weren't technically married. I've had unusual, no kidding, after 33 years of marriage, I don't think there's anything I haven't heard. And I've learned something. I've learned to develop a poker face. I'll tell you, I can play poker with the best of them. I might not win, but you just never know what I got. I can sit there. I've even trained my eyebrows not to move. No kidding. Because sometimes I hear things and people say this stuff to me and I just sit there. And I am having a conversation in my mind. I'm thinking I got to remember to write that one down because that's a new one. I've never heard that one before. But you know, I have really begun to admire that ability to listen to what people say, even when they say unusual things. Things that were meant to upset me even, or distract me, and yet not be affected by them. Sometimes it's not what they're saying, but it's what they're not saying. And so I try not to listen to those things that they're throwing at me and try to look inside and say, what are they really trying to say? You know, what's really going on inside of them? And number 5, ask questions in order to understand. Ask questions in order to understand. You know, when you ask questions, it shows you're interested in what the person's saying. It shows you really want to hear what they're saying. You know, there are some times that you'll talk to somebody and they're trying to get something out. And you're not sure you got it. And it really helps them. I know it sounds odd at times. It sounds formal, but it's really not. To just look at the person and say, am I right in saying that your real concerns are such and such? Or have I misunderstood what you're really trying to say? Or did I understand you correctly when I heard you say this? Or can I repeat back to you what I think I heard you say and you tell me if it's right? Sometimes that really, really helps, you know. Because when people say something and then you don't understand what they said, the conversation goes a totally other direction. If you've ever had it happen to you, you know what I mean. Now, those kind of statements, those questions, help people who are speaking to feel as if you really want to hear what's going on down inside of them. And by the way, just as a side note, you can tell sometimes what people really mean by looking at their gestures and listening to their tone of voice. Sometimes that'll tell you a whole lot what's going on. These things can communicate really almost as powerfully as words can communicate by looking at their gestures. If they're saying, "It doesn't bother me," then you know it really bothers them. You can tell by their nonverbal communication. So let's talk about that for a moment. Number 6, respond verbally and nonverbally. Respond verbally and nonverbally. Sometimes when you're speaking to someone, they don't have any sense whether they're getting through. Hey, I'm talking to some ladies now about husbands. You sit and talk to them. You'll talk to them for an hour. And you have no idea whether they're picking it up. This is why we need to encourage the person that's speaking by giving them some sense that you're listening to them. Did you hear what I said, honey? Yeah. I heard you talking, I know that. Did you hear what I said? There was a certain person who held a very key position in my life spiritually. And I often wished I could just sit down and tell him what was in my heart. And on rare occasions, I got to do it. And when I do it, he would sit with a notepad. And he'd be writing or doodling. And he wouldn't make eye contact with me. And I'd be sitting sharing my heart, and he'd be sitting like this. And I guess he was writing some things down that I was saying, or he's writing down things he wanted to say, or he's writing out a grocery list for his wife, or he was doodling. Sometimes I could see he was re-emphasizing certain letters with his pen, but wouldn't make eye contact with me. Do you know it's really hard to share your heart with somebody who's not looking at you? So a good listener will respond with verbal or nonverbal signs that they're listening. For instance, if somebody seems enthusiastic, be enthusiastic in your response. And they're saying, and it was so exciting what happened. And you sit there. Be excited too. If they say something funny or pleasant, smile. It's nothing worse than, feeling like, you're just talking to a log. Sometimes our gestures or lack of gestures send signals to the speaker that we're not really interested in what they're saying. For instance, avoid crossing your arms when someone's speaking to you. Well, I'm real big on this. When someone's talking to you, don't sit there with your arms crossed. Why? Because that's a sign that you're not interested in talking. You're closed. You're just waiting to unload all barrels. You say, oh, well, that's just a comfortable position for me. But you know, those kind of gestures, those nonverbal communicators, they send messages to the speaker that you're really not that interested. Another one is, if someone is sitting down, you sit down too while they're speaking. Don't stand. Why? Because that's like a position of authority when you're standing and they're sitting. So if they want to talk to you and they sit down, you sit down. Even if you didn't want to sit down, if they're sitting and talking, you sit down. Why? Because if you're just standing there and say, go ahead and tell me what you want to tell me. It's kind of like, I'm here, I've got a couple of minutes, you're on trial, I'll judge it. Make sure you sit down too. He said, well, those are just such small things, but they're very important things. If we're going to learn how to communicate with one another, which, by the way, is incredibly valuable if you're going to be a soul winner, to know how to hear what other people are saying. I used to be like that. When people come talk to me and say, yeah, I think all gods are the same. And it's just like a switch went on inside of me. It's like, I just can't hear anything anymore, and I have these memorized answers. But I've learned over the years to just sit and listen to things like that don't make any sense at all. Well, I believe there are many ways to God. That's interesting that you believe that. And can you tell me more about that? Matt was out evangelizing someone the other day, and I'm sure he discovered how important it is to be patient to hear really bizarre concepts. When you respond with these verbal and nonverbal gestures, you're really encouraging the person to keep going. Share your heart. I'm open. I'm interested. Tell me what's in your heart. And finally, the last thing I want to tell you, don't change the subject. When people are talking, don't change the subject. Keep the focus on them. Have you ever been in a conversation where you just shared your heart and you just can't wait to see what they're going to say, and they start on a totally different subject, and you think, excuse me, did you hear what I said? Yeah, it was this amazing thing happened to me, and you tell this whole story, and isn't it powerful, and God really intervened in my life. Isn't that neat? And the person said, tomorrow I really need to remember to go and do such and such. And it's just like, excuse me, Earth to Bob, have you connected with me at all? Did you hear anything I said? Don't change the subject. Make sure that you stay on track with what the person's saying. It shows that you're concentrating on them. The ability to be a good listener requires that you and I stay with the speaker until they've gotten out of their heart what's in their heart. The ability for you and I to be a good listener is a skill, really, that every Christian minister needs. And I'm speaking of you, not me. As ministers, you need this skill. I need it as a leader. You need it as a minister. Watchman Nee is a great Christian teacher, and he wrote this. There is a prevalent misconception among Christian workers. They think that the primary essential is to be able to speak. Far from it. To be effective workers, we need spiritual clarity. We need discernment concerning the condition of all who seek us out. And we need quietness of mind to hear them state their case. And we need quietness of spirit so that we can sense their true condition beyond their own definitions of it. That's what Watchman Nee said. Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying if you and I will learn to be good listeners, people will talk and we'll be able to discern what's really going on inside of them. Do you know, I learned this lesson a number of years ago in the ministry, that when someone comes to me for counseling, the longer I let them talk, the more I'll find out what the real situation is. So if I'll just wait and let them talk and tell me, sometimes I might have to keep them on track, but I let them keep going, and eventually you'll hear the answer. If you're really listening, you'll hear the answer the longer they speak. This is what Watchman Nee spoke about. We need, as ministers of God, to be practiced in the ability to wait and patiently listen to other people. After more than 3 decades of Christian ministry, I've learned that listening to what people are saying is very, very, very important. Many times in the gospel, Jesus made this statement, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's very important for us. You and I need to know how to hear, not just listen. Are there any questions that you'd ask about how to be a good listener tonight? Can I answer any questions for you on this subject of how to be a good listener? Not that I'm an expert, but if I was missing anything. Did you hear anything that I said? So, Pastor, how do you think the Maple Leafs will do this year? That's not what we're talking about tonight. That's good. Okay, everybody picked up what they needed to pick up tonight. That's a good question. Somebody's talking, they can't think of the right word, and you supply it. I have scored 50-50 on that one myself. You know, they pause and you say, I know exactly what you mean. And you say it and they say, no, that's not really what I was trying to say. I have scored 50-50 on this. I know what you're talking about. And I'm feeling so perceptive, and then I feel just so out of touch. Sometimes it's impolite to do it. I think generally it would be considered impolite. But I think there are times that if you know the person and the situation is right, you can sort of rephrase the thought for them and see if you get it. But I believe that we have to be very careful about that, because the technical interjection can sometimes be demeaning to somebody. I think it can make them feel like they're not communicating effectively. Sometimes I'll just nod and say, I think I understand what you're saying. I think I know what you're trying to say. It can be tough, though, especially if you believe that being articulate is key to communication, then sometimes we can get hung up.
I think what you were saying tonight was a lot to do with husband and wife and, leadership and pastors.
Mm-hmm.
But what if somebody's talking to you and you want to be a good listener, but maybe telling you too much? And they're telling you their heart, but they're pouring it out, and maybe they're not the right person, but you don't want to not be a good listener.
Right.
How do you handle that?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you what I do with it. And I can't say to you tonight that what I do is right, but I'll tell you how I handle it. I consider that when someone goes to great lengths to tell me a lot of information, that they're putting me in a position, whether they acknowledge that or not, they're putting me in a certain position in their life. What they're doing is they're putting me in the position of having to be responsive to what they said. So I take the position that if I think I've gone as far as I want to go with this and can't really take much more information, if they're on so many rabbit trails that even the rabbit is lost, then what I do is I take a leadership role in the conversation. And I'll say, well, can I just interrupt here for a second? And then I just kind of comment on the key point and say, I have to go, or, I'm going to have to leave in just a minute. But let me just tell you what I think about that. And it's a leadership role. It's you saying, listen, somebody needs to take the lead right now, because this thing's going to go forever if I don't step in. I don't know if I'm addressing exactly what you're dealing with. There's a tasteful way to do it. But to me, that's the bottom line. Someone needs to lead, and I've decided I'm going to be the leader and say, excuse me, can I just interrupt for a second? I'm going to have to end this conversation in a minute, but I just wanted to say this, or that's really fascinating, or I'll remember to pray for you, or something like that. I think that it requires somebody taking the lead, and it's better us.
Should you wait until they're finished going on, or should you interrupt and let them know it's taken care of?
Yeah, if you have information that they need, they're conversing with you, and you can tell that if they would just give you some space, you can answer that issue for them. I've been in that many times where someone will say, I've just got a difficulty in my marriage, and and da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes I even wonder whether I should be married. And then I know other people and their marriages fell apart, and I think, well, maybe my marriage is going to fall apart too. And then I think, well, where does the Bible even say that our marriages are guaranteed to stay together? But I don't know. So I talked to my mom about this, and I'm thinking, well, excuse me, I'm here actually to give you the answers to those questions. If you'll give me a break, I've got what you're looking for. It depends a lot on the relationship that you have with the speaker, I think. Like if you're in a position where you can exercise the authority in the relationship and say, I'm going to take the lead. But that's where I used to get hung up. It's because I had answers for everything. And I just felt like people had to start the sentence and I could finish it and tell them what they need to know. And so we have to find a tasteful point where we can jump in. But if the person puts you in a position where they're wanting information from you, then I think you have the right to take the lead and say, let me just interject there and say something about what you just said. Or, that's a very interesting point, what you just said, which shows you listened. And then stop them there and see if you can build something. In the secular world, it's not always as easy, say, as in the Christian world, but even among fellow employees. Even among fellow employees, I've had to deal with this. So it takes a great deal of skill, tact, they say. Then you don't know the whole story. That's absolutely true. Then you don't know the whole story. So what do you do if you jump in too soon? That's why the skill of just listening till you reach the point where you think you've put it together. That's why I say the longer people talk, the easier it is to understand what they're really trying to say. And at a certain point, they'll start repeating it. They'll start going around the circle again. They've told you everything there is to say. Now they're going to tell it to you again. And that's usually the point where I jump off the wheel and say, well, let me just jump in on that key point you made a minute ago. See if I can help you with that.
You have to forego being a good listener when there's something you're not supposed to be listening to.
Is there a point where you have to forego being a good listener when there's something you shouldn't be listening to? Absolutely, yes. Sometimes people come and they'll dump stuff on you, and it's not your place to hear it because it's not your place to do anything about it. It could be slander, it could be garbage, it could be gossip, it could be whining, it could be complaining. And if you're not the one that's going to solve it, you shouldn't be letting it in. So what do? I draw the conclusion, Jason, that if someone dumps garbage on me, they're concluding two things. One is they think I'm just like them. And number two is they think I'm garbage can material, and I'm not. So I actually get strong on that stuff and say, hang on a second, I really am not interested in hearing that. I'm sure that's a great concern to you, but this won't help me at all. It won't serve me. I think you ought to take that up. Go up higher. Don't go sideways with it. There's nothing I can do to solve it. And, sometimes people say, oh, no, I'm not gossiping. Well, actually, I just prefer not to hear that. Somebody might get hurt about it, but I don't think it's right for people to determine whether I'm a garbage can. I just don't think that that's right. That's an important point.
When you look at that list and you recognize that you're weak in some of those parts, what do you suggest that person do? How to practice those skills?
It just depends on which one it is. But for the most part, when I share those things with you, those are things that I get convicted about when I read them too. And I've learned when I used to be an employer and trained employees, I learned that we really can't fix more than 3 things at one time. Well, there's just too many things to juggle. While we're trying to fix those things, we'll drop something else. So you might want to pick 1, 2, or 3 areas and just say, I'm going to focus on that for a while. So if you saw one on the list, you might say, well, that area is one area I'm going to work on for a while. So I'm going to do the opposite. Or if it says that we shouldn't do that, then I'm going to work at therapeutically dealing with that very issue in my life and not responding that way. One good thing about a listener, even if they're not a good listener, but one good thing about a listener is the longer we take to speak, the easier it is for us to deal with our own internal issues in communication. If we'll just take our time. They used to say, count to 10, before you speak. One good therapy is just take time. Don't respond right away. Make sure you connected with the person, but don't necessarily respond right away. And allow yourself time to sort out what's the best way to respond to this. I have had to practice that in pastoral ministry because my tendency is to respond within minutes. But that would at least buy you some time to work on whatever area that was. If you wanted more specific information, I'd be happy to help you. Shoot me an email, and I'll take a look at it. And if there's some wisdom I have on it, I'd be happy to share it with you. Ruby, did you have? Exactly. Somebody's sharing things with you that you shouldn't be hearing. Maybe it's pastoral in nature, but you don't want to entirely shut them down or be rude to them. I think it's the mark of a mature Christian, mature brother and sister, to be able to recognize that person needs to share that right now, but be able to still conclude with, can I give you some input on what's the best thing to do here? Let me give you some counsel on the best way to handle this. I think you need to go to talk to pastor or talk to one of the leaders about it. Can I pray for you that when that meeting happens, everything will go well? Can I take your hand and pray for you right now? And what that does is that shows that you are concerned, but it does say, I'm really not the one that you ought to be talking to. Now, if you find that becomes chronic, my approach to pastoring is that anything that is chronic marital, chronic health, chronic financial, chronic employment, chronic emotional, chronic spiritual situations ought to always go up higher to a pastor. Because if they're chronic, you're not going to fix it with one conversation today. So if you notice that something's chronic, someone keeps coming back and saying, oh, it's getting worse, and you know it's not getting any better, at that point you need to say, I love you, but you're not really dealing with it. You're just talking about it. You really need to go up higher and deal with it. Yeah, you're dealing with a person who's got you slotted in, and or you're not slotted in. And if you don't fit on the list, then that's it, you're out. Hey, I have to deal with this a lot myself just because of the fact that I know people say, well, I wanted to come and talk to you, but I know you're busy. That's really hard for me because I like to tell people I'm only busy helping people like you. So when you think I'm busy, I'm actually in a meeting talking to someone who thought I was too busy. And I'm actually there meeting with you. I run into it a lot where my day is very carefully laid out for me, hour by hour. And if I get off track, I could easily find myself getting tangled up in things that aren't my priority. On one side, the person that wants to share their heart, but meets the to-do man, that's a difficult situation. You might be communicating with the wrong person, but if you're the to-do person and you want to be a good listener, and person comes to you, it really takes a great deal of savvy to know, is this part of my purpose list? Or, because, Jesus ran into people that weren't on his daily to-do list, but they were part of his purpose list. There are some people that I'll spend time with when my day timer says you don't have that time. Or even 1 minute or 2 minutes. Even today, Kathy and I have a meeting at 9 o'clock every Tuesday morning, and sometimes she'll say, well, there's this situation or that call, and sometimes I'll just pick up the phone right away, and I'll make a call, and I'll do it because I know I'm not going to have time, any other time to do it, and I need to deal with it right now. And it gets it off my plate where it doesn't belong right now, but it gives me a chance to open a door. I might not be answering your question well, but I think our purpose, there'll be divine moments when you'll be on an errand. Remember to get 2 loaves of bread and 2 liters of 1% milk on the way home, and you run into someone. And there you are witnessing over the dairy counter. And it's not on your list. And yes, there are things to do, but you just have to determine at that moment that this was a divine moment, a divine connection, and don't miss it. It's part of your purpose for that moment. It might not be on your to-do list. We'll take one more. Kevin.
Right and wrong times to have certain conversations, like it's too late tonight to get into that. I'd rather wait until we can have more time to discuss it, or your agenda is
Not fair.
squashed.
You're reading my mail. I'm forever getting myself into those situations. Yeah, there really is a right and wrong time. I'll tell you this, when you're tired, it's a really bad time to have a deep conversation. It's just really the wrong time. And sometimes setting up 9 o'clock at night meetings to discuss really heavy-duty issues doesn't work. Let me say about that, though. Husbands, many times, that might be the only moment you and your wife finally have time alone together to talk. And while you're really just wanting to relax and maybe even go to sleep, and she wants to say, there's this major crisis that we need to deal with. Little Johnny has got to make a decision about his education. And you say, but he's only 2. I know, but if we don't plan now, and you're saying, yeah, but it's 10 after 9, and so we really have to be careful about whether we're emotionally ready to handle it. Is that person you're going to talk to ready to sit through an intense emotional conversation or do a lot of mental work at that hour of the night? Sometimes it's too close to a situation, too soon after, or too soon before the situation for you to talk about it, and it wouldn't be good to discuss it then. Sometimes people have questions and you say, now's not the best time to ask. Let's just wait a little while and we'll talk about it at another time. I used to say to myself, Daisy, that if I could get people to wait 2 weeks before they saw me for counseling, they'd likely fix the problem before they got in. And there are just those moments where it's better not to speak. It takes great wisdom to know. In a husband-wife relationship, it's better to just let the conversation go. Let it start. Get some of it out. Look for a tasteful way to deal with it. Because those moments are rare and precious when you can communicate. But in others, man, you just got to get the right time and the right place. Yeah, there really is a right time and a right place to talk about it. This is a big subject. I'm going to talk to you more about some of these tools that we can use as ministers, and they will affect our homes as well. Father, thank you for helping us to be good listeners. We've got the Holy Ghost living in us. And whatever we're not good at, Father, I pray tonight that the word spoken and the word working will help us to make the changes. As we give ourselves to you, help us to do it. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.